The 19 men stood when she walked in. They didn't speak, didn't gesture to each other, didn't get a signal from anyone. They simply rose from their chairs in the waiting room of the Fort Clement Veterans Service Center the way soldiers rise when someone worth standing for enters a room, not from ceremony, from something older than ceremony. A few of them had driven 3 hours to be there. One had taken the first flight out of Phoenix. None of them had been asked to come. All of them had come anyway. Major Dale Corrigan, who had just told a 19-year-old that his dead father's service record was inconsistent with what any legitimate classified file should look like, stepped out of his office and saw them. He stood in the hallway with his hand still on the door handle and didn't say anything for a moment that went on too long. The woman they were standing for was wearing blue scrubs. She'd come straight from a 12-hour night shift. She hadn't changed. She hadn't stopped for coffee. She'd gotten the call from her brother at 9:14 and driven 40 minutes to get here, and she looked exactly like what Major Corrigan thought she was. A tired nurse in her early 30s who had no business being in a federal military benefits office on a Tuesday morning. He was wrong about that. He had been wrong about several things already today. He was about to find out how many. The morning had started with Cody Ashby. He was 19 and built like someone who hadn't quite grown into his own height yet, all angles and forward momentum, the kind of kid who was always slightly faster than the situation required. He'd driven to Fort Clement alone because his sister was sleeping. She'd worked the overnight shift at Ridgecrest Regional the night before, 12 hours on her feet in the ICU, and he had told himself he could handle one appointment. He'd been handling things alone since he was 11. One appointment should have been nothing. The reason he was there at all was a letter that had arrived 3 weeks earlier from the Veterans Service Center, informing him that his application for survivors' education benefits had been flagged for review due to inconsistencies in the primary service record of the qualifying deceased veteran. His father, Staff Sergeant Wren Ashby, had been killed 8 years ago. Cody didn't remember much about that year, except that his sister had come home from somewhere she wouldn't talk about, and she'd cried for 3 days in the bathroom with the door locked, and then she'd stopped and never cried about it again, and they'd never spoken about it directly. The benefit was supposed to cover his first 2 years of school. He deferred college by a year to save money because the benefit hadn't come through yet. He was working part-time at a hardware store in Clifton and spending his evenings studying for placement tests he couldn't register for without knowing whether he could afford tuition. He had his father's discharge papers, the death notification letter, and a folder of documents his sister had assembled over 3 evenings at the kitchen table, each page tabbed and organized in the careful, systematic way she did everything. He trusted the folder. He trusted her. He signed in at the front desk, got a number, and sat down to wait. The clerk who called him back was efficient and neutral in the way of someone who had processed too many files to register them as belonging to people. She scanned the documents, frowned at her screen, and told him he'd need to speak with a processing officer. Routine, she said. Complex files sometimes required it. The processing officer was Major Dale Corrigan. Corrigan was in his mid-40s with the face of a man who had been given authority at a formative age and organized his entire personality around it. His desk was the kind of desk that people arrange so you understand, before you sit down, who the room belongs to. He had his rank insignia framed on the wall to his left and a photo of himself with a senator on the wall to his right, and he wore his uniform like a man who put it on with the specific intention of being taken seriously. He looked at the folder, he looked at Cody, he opened it and spent 4 minutes reading in silence before he spoke. Staff Sergeant Wren Ashby, he said, your father. Yes, sir. Says here he was killed in action. Classified operational context. Service record contains multiple redactions at the Tier 3 level. Corrigan tilted his head. That's a significant claim. I know. Your sister put this folder together? Yes, sir. And what does your sister do? She's a nurse at Ridgecrest Regional. There was a pause. Corrigan closed the folder with a deliberate motion. I've processed a significant number of survivor benefit applications. I've also processed a significant number of fraudulent ones. A Tier 3 redaction on a record with no supporting chain of documentation I can access is one of the clearest markers I know. Cody felt the first pull of something behind his sternum, not quite anger, more like the awareness that this was going to be harder than it should be. The records are classified, that's why they're redacted. Anyone can claim their records are classified. That's not verification. That's a strategy. Corrigan leaned back. What I'm seeing looks like a record that's been inflated post-mortem to qualify for a higher tier of survivor benefits. The word landed in the room, inflated. Cody was quiet for a moment. He was 19. He had been 11 years old when two people in dress uniforms knocked on their door, and his sister had answered it because she was home first, and he had watched her face from the top of the stairs before he understood what he was looking at. "My father is buried at Arlington," Cody said. That doesn't verify the classification tier of his service record. Corrigan picked up his pen. "I'm going to flag this for a fraud review. Your application is suspended pending investigation." He stood. "I need you to wait while I initiate the referral." "My medication." Cody stopped. That wasn't the right thing to say. He wasn't here for medication. He was here for tuition. He had deferred a year of his life for this folder. "Can I call my sister?" "You can do whatever you want. You're not under arrest." Corrigan moved toward the door. "Yet." Cody called her. She answered on the first ring, which meant she hadn't been sleeping. He told her what Corrigan had said. She was quiet while he talked, the particular kind of quiet that meant she was organizing information rather than absorbing shock. When he finished, she said, "What's the officer's name?" "Major Corrigan." "Okay, a short pause. I'm coming." "Wren, you just worked 12 hours. "Cody." Her voice had a quality it got sometimes, calm the way water is calm on top of something moving very fast underneath. "What room are you in?" 214. "Don't sign anything." She arrived in 38 minutes. The 19 men were already there when she came through the second-floor door. She had made 4 calls from the hospital parking lot before she got into her car, and the rest had organized themselves in the hour it took her to drive. That was the thing about people who had spent years in environments where organization was survival. They didn't need to be told how to show up. They needed to be told where. The man nearest the door was in his early 40s, a scar running below his jaw and disappearing into his collar. He gave her a single nod. She returned it. Then she walked down the hall to room 214. Corrigan was at his desk when she pushed the door open. He looked up with the expression of a man expecting a clerk and finding something he didn't have a category for. He saw scrubs, a hospital lanyard, a paper coffee cup she was still holding. He looked past her into the hallway, saw the edge of the waiting room and the men filling it, and something moved across his expression that he covered quickly. "Ms. Ashby?" Guessing. "I understand you've flagged my brother's application for a fraud review." She crossed to the chair beside Cody's and sat down without being invited. "The inconsistencies in the file are redactions. The redactions exist because the operational records are classified at a tier your office isn't authorized to access. That's not an inconsistency in the documentation. That's the security architecture working correctly." Corrigan regrouped. "Anyone can claim." "I'm not claiming anything." She reached into the inside pocket of her scrub top and set a laminated card on the edge of his desk. Not her nursing credentials, something else. A federal department code and a contact number, nothing identifying. "You're going to call the number on that card. You'll provide your name, rank, and facility code." She held his gaze. "Then you're going to listen." Corrigan's jaw shifted. "I don't take instructions from civilians in a federal benefits." "Major." Her voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen. It had the quality of something that didn't need to prove it was serious because it had never needed to. "My brother's father is buried at Section 60 at Arlington. He was killed 8 years ago in an operation I cannot name in a location I cannot name, performing work that will remain classified until 2041. His cause of death was documented correctly in the original after-action report. That document exists. You don't have access to it. That is not fabrication. That is exactly how the system is supposed to work." A pause. "The number on that card will confirm what I've just told you. Make the call." Corrigan looked at the card. He looked at Cody. He looked into the hallway, where several of the men from the waiting room had migrated closer without appearing to move, standing with the easy stillness of people who have nothing to prove and know where they need to be. He made the call. He used the desk phone, provided his name and rank and facility code in a controlled professional voice. Then he listened. The change in his face didn't happen all at once. It was incremental, a tightening around the eyes, a recalibration in his posture, the specific expression of a man who has been certain about something and is now not certain about it and is managing what that means in real time. He said, "Yes, sir." And then after a pause, "I understand." And then very quietly, once more, "Yes, sir." He put the phone down. He looked at the desk for a moment. Then he looked up. "The application will be processed in full," he said, "retroactive to the original filing date. The fraud designation is removed. The flag on the record is removed." His voice had lost its earlier quality, the slight elevation of a man performing authority. What remained was flat and functional. "I owe your brother an apology for how his file was characterized today." He looked at Cody, actually looked at him, maybe for the first time since he'd walked in. "What I said about your father's record was not appropriate. I made an assumption, and the assumption was wrong. I'm sorry." Cody didn't say it was fine. He picked up the folder from the edge of the desk and nodded once, which was the right amount. Wren stood. "Thank you," she said, without irony, without warmth, with the precision of someone who means it in exactly the specific way they say it, and nothing more. They were in the car before Cody spoke. "The men in the waiting room." "Yes." "You called them." "I called 4 people. The rest organized themselves." She was driving with both hands on the wheel, watching the road. "People I worked with, or people I worked on. Both, depending on the individual." He looked at her profile. She had their father's chin. He'd always thought that the particular set of it, the way she held her jaw when she was working through something, worked with how. She was quiet for a moment that stretched past comfortable. "I wasn't a hospital nurse," she said, "when your father died." He waited. "I was a combat medic, attached to a special operations support element. I'd been doing it for 2 years by the time." She stopped. Started again. "I was on the same operation." The car moved through a light, traffic, a Tuesday, the kind of morning that has no business existing alongside what she was saying. "The operation where Dad was killed," Cody said. "Yes." He sat with that. The trees came up along the shoulder. The coast appeared in the distance, gray-green below the cloud line. "I was 22, she said. "Your father didn't know I was on the same operation until we were in the field. He saw me at the forward position on day 4, and he went completely white." Something moved in her face that she didn't try to stop. He was angry for about 40 seconds, and then he wasn't. Cody thought about his father. His memories of him were more like photographs than films, still images without the motion of full recollection. His father's hands. The particular way he laughed, sudden and genuine, like he couldn't help it. "What happened to him?" Cody said carefully. "The real version." She turned onto the highway. "He found something on day 7. Intelligence that wasn't supposed to be there. Traffic on a secondary channel indicating our position had been compromised. He flagged it immediately. He documented everything, every detail, because that was who he was." A pause. 24 hours later, there was an incident at the perimeter. He didn't survive it. Cody's hands were very still in his lap. The official record called it a non-combat medical event, acute cardiac event in the field. She said the words the way people say things they have said many times internally to keep from screaming. "It wasn't. I was the medic on scene. I know what I treated. I know what the paperwork says, and I know what I was looking at with my own hands, and they are not the same thing." Why does the official record say something different? Because the operation was classified. Because the channel compromise was connected to information that certain people needed to stay buried. Because your father was 11 days from coming home, and he found the wrong thing at the wrong time. She exhaled slowly. "I filed a field report that same day. I wrote what I saw, what I treated, the actual sequence and cause. My commanding officer superseded it 48 hours later with the cardiac event documentation." Her hands were steady on the wheel. I was 22. I was 3 weeks from coming home. You were 11 and you just lost your father. And I didn't have what it was going to take to fight a superior officer on a classified operation with nothing left in me. That's not an excuse. It's what happened. Cody looked at his sister in the Tuesday morning light. He had spent 8 years with a version of events. Training accident, hard in the field, nothing more specific, that had always felt like a door that opened into a room nobody would let him enter. He had stopped trying the handle somewhere around the time he turned 15, because the not knowing had become a shape he had learned to live around. "You were there," he said. "Yes." "You tried to save him." "Yes." One word, flat, with the particular weight of something that hasn't been said aloud in a very long time. He looked at the road. He looked at the trees. He looked at nothing in particular while the shape of the room he'd never been allowed into began to arrange itself around him. "Okay," he said finally. She glanced at him. "Okay. I need time with it, but okay." She nodded. They drove the rest of the way without speaking, which was its own kind of conversation. What happened after was not simple. Simple endings belong to stories that haven't met the actual weight of the world they're describing. The benefits application processed in full within 72 hours. Cody registered for his first semester in February. The fraud flag was removed, the record corrected at the tier Corrigan's office could access, and the formal written confirmation arrived in a plain white envelope that Cody held for a while before he opened it. Wren's field report, the original, the superseded one, was a different matter entirely. The call she had made from the hospital parking lot had reached someone who had been waiting for a reason to open a particular file for 3 years. The challenge to Cody's benefits was that reason. Her appearance at Fort Clement, the federal contact card, the 19 men standing in the waiting room, all of it created a paper trail that led back to a desk that had been waiting for exactly this kind of trail. She had not known that when she made the call. She had made it to protect her brother's application. What it set in motion was larger than that. The investigation took 4 months. She was not its subject. She was its foundation. Her original field report, retrieved from a classified archive where superseded documents are held precisely for eventualities like this, became the primary documentation for a formal review of the incident that had killed their father. She sat in a federal building in Portland for 3 hours and told the story she had carried for 8 years in the flat, precise language of someone who has had it organized in her mind for a very long time. It was not cathartic in the way people imagine catharsis. It was more like surgery, necessary, painful in the specific ways that precision is painful. Something you are grateful for afterward, even when the gratitude is complicated. Major Corrigan's conduct was reviewed concurrently. The investigation into his handling of Cody's application identified 14 additional cases over 6 years in which Corrigan had flagged legitimate survivor benefit claims as fraudulent, using classification status as justification for denial. All 14 had been denied or delayed without cause. His processing authority was suspended, pending a formal disciplinary hearing. 11 of the 14 families were notified and their claims reinstated. Cody's was the first. It was always the first. On a Thursday evening in March, Wren came home from her shift to find her brother at the kitchen table with a letter she recognized by the federal seal before she set down her bag. "It came today," he said. She sat across from him. The letter was from the Department of the Army's Casualty Affairs Office. Careful language, formal and very specific. The cause of death on Staff Sergeant Wren Ashby's official record had been revised following a completed evidentiary review. The designation was accurate and permanent and would remain so. The paperwork said what had always been true. It just finally said it somewhere that counted. Cody looked at the table when she finished reading. "The cardiac event thing," he said. "It's just gone now." "Yes." He was quiet for a while. The kitchen had the stillness of early spring, the light going long and golden, the sound of the street coming through the window in small pieces. He looked like their father when he was thinking hard. The set of his shoulders, the particular stillness before he spoke. "He found something that mattered," Cody said. "Yes." And he reported it the right way. through the correct channel, in the correct form, documented everything. She held her brother's eyes. He was thorough. He always was. And you wrote the accurate report. Yes, even knowing it would probably get buried. She thought about it honestly. I knew it was true. I knew it was the accurate account. Whether it would matter, she stopped. I filed it because I believed it could matter, even if not right then. The superseded document goes into an archive. I knew that. I held on to that. She looked at her hands. It was the thing I held on to. He thought about his sister at 22, coming home to an 11-year-old who didn't fully understand what he'd lost, filing a report she didn't know would ever see daylight, carrying the weight of what she'd witnessed while working night shifts, and making sure he had lunch money, and sitting at the kitchen table, putting together folders with careful handwritten tabs. He thought about all the rooms she'd kept closed, all the mornings she'd been already awake when he came downstairs, and he'd never thought to ask why. Why didn't you tell me, he said. Not then, but later, when I was older. She looked at the table between them. Because every time I thought about it, I imagined you knowing, and then I imagined what your face would look like and what the next morning would feel like, and every morning after that. She pressed her mouth together for a moment. I told myself I was protecting you. I probably was, but I was also protecting myself from watching you carry it the way I carry it. She looked at him directly. Those aren't the same thing. I let myself believe they were for too long. He wasn't angry. He'd thought he would be angry when he finally got to this room, this table, this version of events. But what he actually felt was something closer to grief and relief arriving at the same time, which was its own particular kind of difficult. You came back, he said, after everything. You came home and you stayed. Of course I did. I know, he looked at the letter. I know that's everything. It still is. She looked at her brother in the kitchen light, 19 and more like their father than he knew, and thought about what she had spent her adult life believing strength looked like. Self-contained, controlled. The nurse who runs the floor without asking for help. The sister who assembles the folder and says it will be straightforward. But the things that had actually changed anything, the corrected record, the 14 families with reinstated claims, the 3 hours in the Portland Federal Building, none of it had come from endurance. None of it had come from the quiet carrying of weight. It had come from the field report she'd written at 22 and refused to let be the last word. From the card placed on Corrigan's desk. From 4 calls in a parking lot that 19 men had answered without being asked twice. From the willingness to be in the room where the true thing was documented in a way that mattered. Strength that no one sees is just loneliness with better posture. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't correct any record. It doesn't give anyone back what they were owed. Okay, she said, ask me the rest. He looked up. What? Your questions. You have more of them. She folded her hands on the table. We have time, and I'm done keeping rooms you're not allowed into. He looked at her for a moment, those eyes so much like their father's, steady and watchful and not giving much away. And then he pulled his chair forward and started talking, and she answered everything she could, and the ones she couldn't answer, she said so plainly and without apology. And the ones that required more than one night, she said, we'll come back to it. And the letter with the corrected record sat between them on the table. And the street outside went quiet, and the kitchen light stayed on. It wasn't everything, but it was the beginning of everything. That's usually how the real things start.